The wind howled through the trees like a ghost crying in pain. Snow fell quietly over the broken buildings of Sector 19, a place forgotten by both war and peace. There was nothing left here, only rusted metal, cracked glass, and silent memories. Grant was a scavenger, a human who lived alone and hunted old tech from abandoned places. He had no family, no friends, and no reason to go back to the cities. He liked it that way. But today, something was different. He had followed an old signal, thinking it might lead him to a working energy cell, or maybe some black market tech. Instead, it led him to a hidden building buried under snow and vines. It looked like a lab, or maybe a bunker, sealed tight from the outside. Grant pulled out his laser cutter and melted the rusted lock. As the door creaked open, a gust of cold air rushed out, and with it, a sound, not the sound of machines or alarms, but something else. A cry. It was soft, high-pitched, and full of fear. He stepped inside, his boots crunching against ice and broken glass. The place smelled like chemicals and death. Lights flickered weakly as he moved down the hallway. Following the sound, at the end of the corridor, a heavy metal door stood slightly open. Grant pushed it with his shoulder, and the room inside made him freeze. There was a cage. Inside the cage was a little alien girl, no older than 6 by human standards. Her skin was pale purple, and her eyes were glowing a soft blue. Her hair was white and tangled, her clothes torn and dirty. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, shivering. When she saw Grant, her lips parted and she whispered, "Can I have a dad now, please?" Grant blinked, stunned. He had seen aliens before, fought a few in his army days, traded with some, but he had never seen one so small, so scared, so human. He stepped closer and noticed something else. Another cage behind her. This one held a taller alien woman, unconscious and barely breathing. Her skin was the same color, her face older but strikingly beautiful. She had injuries on her arms, and her breathing was shallow. What is this place? Grant whispered to himself. The girl didn't answer, but her eyes never left him. She gripped the bars of the cage and said again, "Please don't leave. Everyone leaves. Even Mama can't move now." Grant felt his heart twist. This wasn't a lab anymore. It was a prison, a forgotten experiment site, maybe from the last war. He looked at the control panel beside the cage. It was still active, blinking faintly. A few buttons, a few warnings, and one red lever marked emergency. Release. He hesitated. What if this was a trap? What if the girl wasn't what she seemed? But then he saw the bruises on her arms, the dried blood on the woman's legs. This wasn't a trick. This was survival. He pulled the lever. The cage opened with a loud hiss, steam rising from the edges. The girl didn't run. She just crawled slowly out and looked up at him. Then, without warning, she hugged him. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. Grant didn't move, didn't speak. Something inside him cracked open. He gently picked her up and placed her near the warmth of his coat. Then he unlocked the second cage and carefully lifted the mother over his shoulder. "We're getting out of here," he said quietly. But as he turned to leave, red lights flashed along the hallway. An automated voice echoed through the building. "Alert, containment breach, security protocol engaged." Grant cursed under his breath. Of course nothing was ever easy. He ran down the hall with the girl holding onto his arm and the mother barely breathing on his back. Outside, the snow had grown thicker, the sky darker. Behind him, mechanical whirs and distant thuds told him something had awakened. Something that didn't want them to leave. But Grant had made a decision. He didn't know why, and he didn't know how. But he wasn't leaving them here to die. As they reached his skimmer and he placed them both inside, the girl leaned close to him again and said, "You smell like firewood and old metal, but you feel like home." And just like that, Grant knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Asterisk. The snow outside was falling harder now, thick flakes covering Grant's footprints as he carried the alien mother in his arms, and the little girl walked beside him, holding tightly to the back of his coat. Her small hand trembled, but she didn't cry. She kept looking over her shoulder, eyes wide and alert. She had grown up in a cage. She knew when danger was coming. Grant reached his old transport skimmer. Hidden behind frozen bushes, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. He laid the mother gently inside, then helped the girl into the front seat. The girl looked at the buttons and levers like they were magic. "Are we safe now?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. "No," Grant said honestly. Strapping in and starting the engine, red lights still flashed behind them, deep in the woods. Whatever was guarding the lab had been activated. It would come, and it would come fast. The skimmer rumbled as it lifted off the snow-covered ground. Grant pulled the controls and veered into the trees, keeping low and fast. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to keep moving. "Who are you?" the girl asked, quietly after a long silence. "I'm just a guy who was looking for spare parts," Grant said. The girl tilted her head. "You found us instead?" He glanced at her. "Yeah." "I did." Suddenly, a loud metallic screech echoed from behind. Grant looked into the rear monitor and saw something large crawling out of the lab ruins. It had 6 legs, glowing red eyes, and a mouth full of metal fangs. A lab defense unit, left behind to guard the experiments. It was following their heat trail, moving fast and gaining speed. Grant gritted his teeth. "Hold on." The girl held onto the seat, eyes wide. The skimmer ducked under fallen trees and skimmed above icy rivers. But the machine was faster. It fired a pulse blast that just missed them. Snow exploded on their side and the skimmer shook violently. Inside, the mother groaned, her body weak but alive. The girl crawled back to her and touched her face gently, whispering in her alien language. Her voice was calm, soft, full of love. Grant didn't understand the words, but he felt them. He pushed the skimmer harder, twisting through narrow rock paths until the engine began to spark. The machine behind them didn't stop, but just before the next blast came, Grant swerved through a narrow canyon. The defense unit was too large. It smashed into the rock wall and exploded into fire and smoke. The skimmer crashed down on the other side, skidding to a stop near an old broken tower. Grant jumped out, checked for damage, then sighed in relief. They were safe. For now, the girl climbed out slowly and looked up at him. "You didn't leave us," she said, like it was the most amazing thing in the world. "No, kid," Grant said. "I didn't." He started a small fire inside the broken tower, using old wood and his emergency starter. The girl sat next to her mother, who was still unconscious, but her breathing had improved. Grant brought over a warm blanket and wrapped it around them both. "What's your name?" he asked. "Luma," the girl said. "Her name is Vera. She's my mom." He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Luma." She looked at the fire, then at him. "Do all humans have names like that?" Grant smiled faintly. "Most do." She leaned against her mother, eyes drooping, but still watching him. "Are you really a dad now?" Grant blinked, unsure how to answer. "I don't know what I am," he said. "But I'm not leaving you." Luma nodded slowly. "Okay. You can be dad for now." For a while, the only sound was the wind outside. Then Luma whispered, "They hurt her because of me." Grant looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "She protected me because they wanted me for something," she said, her voice low. "Something in my blood. They said I'm special." Grant didn't understand, not yet, but he knew enough. If people were hunting this girl and her mother, it wasn't going to stop. The fire crackled as Luma finally fell asleep. Grant looked down at the two of them and realized something. He came to Sector 19 for scrap, but instead, he found purpose. Outside the tower, far away, a blinking beacon lit up on a bounty hunter's screen. A new bounty had just gone out. Capture the child and eliminate the human. The shadows were moving again, and this time, they would be faster, stronger, and far less forgiving. The ruins were quiet, but Grant's mind wasn't. The cold air bit at his fingers as he stood guard near the fire. his eyes never leaving the girl and her mother. Luma had curled beside her mother, both wrapped in old blankets Grant had found. She was too quiet for a child, too still, like she had grown up in fear, not freedom. When Vera's eyes fluttered open, her breath came in sharp gasps. She tried to sit up, but Grant gently stopped her. "You're safe," he said softly. "At least for now," Vera blinked, then whispered, "Luma." "Is she?" "She's right here," Grant replied, and Luma, hearing her mother's voice, rushed to her side. "Mama," she whispered, holding her hand tightly. Vera smiled weakly, brushing a shaky hand through her daughter's silver white hair. Then her eyes slowly rose to meet Grant's, and in them he saw not just exhaustion, but grief, fear, and something else. A warning. "Why were you in that lab?" Grant asked, keeping his voice calm but direct. Vera closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "She's not just my daughter," she said softly. "She's more than I ever wanted her to be." Grant frowned. "You mean that literally, don't you?" Vera nodded. "She's the last living heir to the Lunari bloodline," she said. "A lineage once trusted by hundreds of worlds." Grant stepped back slightly, processing what she just said. "You're saying she's royalty?" "No," Vera whispered. "She's beyond royalty. She's a starburn, a child born under the rarest alignment of suns, marked with ancient genetics, chosen by something older than any throne." Grant looked at Luma, who sat silently, her glowing blue eyes watching him carefully. "She's a kid," he muttered. "She's a symbol," Vera corrected. "And symbols terrify powerful men." Grant turned toward the fire, trying to understand the weight of what he'd stumbled into. "I thought I was saving the child from a cage," he said. "Now you're telling me she could change the galaxy." "She already is," Vera said, "even if she doesn't know it yet. They ran tests on her, took her blood, tried to suppress her gifts. They failed," Luma spoke suddenly, her voice steady. "They were scared of me." Grant looked at her, surprised by how clear her tone was. "They said I would wake something up," she added. "I don't know what that means." Vera reached out and placed something small in Grant's hand. It was a black crystal, shaped like a drop of water, but glowing faintly from within. "This is her marker," Vera said. "Only children of the old stars carry one, and only those bonded to them can activate it." Grant felt a strange warmth in his palm. The crystal pulsed once. He looked down, and it pulsed again, stronger this time. "It's reacting to you," Vera whispered, eyes wide. "That shouldn't be possible. I don't even know what I'm doing." Grant muttered, but the truth was, something had changed inside him. He hadn't felt this alive in years, not since before the wars, not since before he lost everything. Vera's voice became urgent. "You need to take her to a place called Sanctum. It's a hidden stronghold of the old code. Only there can she be trained, protected." "Understood." Grant stared at the mother and daughter. "How far is it?" he asked. "Across 3 systems," she replied. "The journey is dangerous. The enemies are powerful, and many will want her dead." "Sounds like fun," Grant said, half joking. Vera gave him a tired smile. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said, looking at Luma. "But I will." Luma stood and walked to him, reaching for his hand. "I choose you," she said, her small fingers curling around his. "I've seen faces of soldiers, traitors, fighters. But your face doesn't lie." Grant swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Luma stepped closer and added, "I want to be brave like you. Even if I'm special." From the shadows outside, unseen by them, a hidden drone blinked to life. It sent a silent signal back to its master, a warlord named Varkan. He watched the feed from a distant fortress and narrowed his eyes. "So," he growled, "the starburn girl has bonded with a human." He turned to his soldiers. "Double the bounty. Bring the child to me alive and make sure the human bleeds." Back in the ruined tower, Grant packed what little supplies they had. Vera was too weak to walk far, but Luma helped support her mother's weight. As they stepped out into the snowy light, the cold biting at their faces, Luma said once more, "Are you still my dad?" Grant didn't answer with words, he just tightened his grip on her hand. And together, they walked into the storm. The sky above was gray and silent, but trouble was moving fast below it. Grant's skimmer slid across the frozen plains, leaving a long trail behind it, a trail too easy to follow inside. Luma kept her head low, hugging her mother tightly, while Grant focused on the controls, eyes sharp and cold. They had left the broken tower before sunrise. Vera was still weaker, skin pale, her strength fading. Luma stayed beside her, watching every breath her mother took. Afraid it might be the last, Grant didn't say much, but his mind was racing. He had seen death before, too much of it. But now he was carrying something far heavier than guilt or regret. He was carrying purpose. Far behind them, black dots in the sky grew larger, not clouds, not birds, but bounty ships. Moving fast, silent as blades, Varkan's hunters had arrived. In a dark command deck orbiting above, Varkan sat watching a glowing red map. The tracker drone had confirmed the location. Sector 19, moving west toward the canyons. He turned to his lieutenant. Voice like gravel, "Send the Crimson unit." No survivors this time. Back on the surface, Grant noticed the scanner on the skimmer blink red. "Company," he muttered, tightening his grip on the controls. Luma looked up. "Are they close?" "Too close," he replied. "Will they take me again?" She asked softly. "Not while I'm breathing," Grant said. Suddenly, plasma shots ripped through the air, one slamming into the ice just inches from their path. The skimmer rocked violently, warning lights flashing. Grant swerved hard, racing toward the canyon mouth, their only chance to hide. Two enemy ships descended, black and silent, like vultures. Each carried soldiers in red armor, the Crimson unit, feared across systems for their brutality. One of them jumped from the ship before it landed, landing hard on the snow with a thud. He raised his weapon, targeting the skimmer's engine. Luma felt something inside her pulse, a strange warmth in her chest. She grabbed Grant's hand from behind, eyes glowing faintly. "Turn now," she whispered. Grant obeyed without questioning, spinning the skimmer sharply. The plasma blast missed by inches, striking a boulder and sending shards of ice everywhere. They dove into the canyon, the walls closing around them, forcing the bounty ships to slow. Grant flew between sharp turns and narrow paths, pushing the skimmer beyond safe limits. Behind them, two ships clipped the rocks and crashed in fiery explosions. The rest slowed down, calculating a new trap. At the canyon base, Grant found a narrow crack in the rock wall, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. He parked the skimmer behind it, powered it down, and covered the vehicle with a heat-dampening tarp. Then he motioned for Luma and Vera to follow him on foot. Deeper into the rocks they moved in silence, the only sound the crunch of snow under boots. Every breath fogged the air, every heartbeat loud. Above them, the bounty hunters spread out on foot, scanning for signs. Vera whispered something in her language, but her voice was too weak to finish the sentence. Luma wrapped her arms around her mother and looked at Grant. "We can't keep running like this," she said. "We won't." Grant answered, "We'll find shelter, then we figure out the next move." Behind a curve in the rock, they found a hidden cave, dark but dry. Grant lit a heat stick, warming the air slightly. He helped Vera lie down, placing a spare coat under her head. Luma sat beside her, gently stroking her mother's cheek. "I've seen these men before," Vera whispered. "On worlds they burn. In villages they erase. They were sent by Varkan." Grant clenched his jaw. He had heard the name before, a warlord who dealt in secrets, slavery, and stolen power. If Varkan wanted the girl, it wasn't just for control. It was for domination. A beeping sound broke the silence. Grant pulled a small cube from his coat, a communication jammer he had activated days ago. It had just detected a signal, someone trying to lock onto their position. He crushed it under his boot, then turned to Luma. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She looked at him without fear, only calm. Yes, she said. I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. Grant took her hand and pressed something into it, a small tracker key. If anything happens to me, he said, follow the light. It'll take you to a contact of mine near the drift market. Luma stared at him, then nodded. But you're not going to leave us, right? She whispered. Grant smiled faintly. Not unless they drag me away, outside the cave. Footsteps echoed faintly across the canyon walls. The hunters were getting closer. Grant looked at the sleeping mother, at the brave little girl, and then, at the entrance of the cave. He knew the next few hours could decide everything, and he was ready to fight, not because he was a soldier, but because he was a father now. The skies above Crosspoint Station were filled with blinking lights. Ships from every corner of the galaxy floated through the air lanes, loud, colorful, and dangerous. Grant had never liked this place. Too many eyes, too many lies, too many people with guns behind fake smiles. But it was the only place close enough where he could get forged papers, fuel, and maybe passage to Sanctum. So he brought Vera and Luma into the belly of the station, where neon lights flickered and trash lined the corridors. Vera wore a cloak over her head, her energy still weak, while Luma held tightly onto Grant's hand. The crowd moved around them like a river, not caring who lived, who died, or who was being hunted. But Grant knew better. Someone was always watching. He led them down a narrow alley to a quiet shop with a flickering sign that read Fixes and Fakes. Inside, the air smelled like burnt circuits and grease. A short human man with goggles over his eyes looked up from behind a metal desk. Well, he said. If it ain't Grant Holloway, I thought you were dead. I was, Grant muttered. Now I need your help. Red glanced at Luma and Vera and raised an eyebrow. You running with aliens now? Grant nodded. They're under my protection. Red didn't ask more questions. He knew better. They made a deal. Fake IDs, new ship tags, and a stealth route to Sanctum, all in exchange for the last working plasma core Grant had salvaged. Red took the core with greedy hands, then told them to meet him in Hangar 9 at midnight. Come alone, he warned. Too many ears in this place. Grant nodded. But his gut twisted. He knew Red, and Red had always been a rat, helpful, but always ready to bite if the price was right. That night, as they waited in a small shelter inside the station's lower levels, Vera turned to Grant. Do you trust this man? She asked. No, Grant replied, but I trust that he loves money more than betrayal. Vera sighed. That's not comfort. Luma sat quietly beside them, her eyes glowing faintly. Something feels wrong, she whispered. Grant looked at her. What do you mean? The air is loud, she said. Even when no one speaks, I hear hearts beating, fast. Grant stood quickly, pulling out his sidearm. We're leaving, he said. Now, but it was too late. As they stepped into the hallway, figures stepped out from the shadows, bounty hunters, red-armored and silent, weapons drawn. At the center of them stood Red, holding the plasma core in one hand and a tracking beacon in the other. Sorry, Grant, he said, but Varkin pays triple. Grant raised his weapon, but he was surrounded. He pushed Luma behind him and whispered, When I say run, you run, got it? Luma nodded, clutching the small crystal hidden in her coat. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed through the hallway, an explosion from the far side. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and smoke filled the air. Grant didn't wait. He grabbed Luma's hand, lifted Vera over his shoulder, and ran through the confusion. Shots fired behind them. Burning through the walls, Red shouted something, but his voice was drowned in chaos. Grant turned a corner, then another, running until his lungs burned. They ducked into a storage bay, sealed the door, and collapsed behind crates. Luma was breathing fast, her eyes wide. Vera coughed weakly, her lips trembling. Grant placed her down gently, then looked at Luma. I'm sorry, he said. I should have known. Luma crawled closer and held his hand. It's not your fault, she said. He was afraid, and fear makes people Sell their souls. Grant stared at her, surprised by the wisdom in her words. She wasn't just royalty. She was born to lead in the silence. The crystal in her coat began to glow brighter. Vera looked up and smiled faintly. She's awakening, she whispered. Her blood is calling, her purpose growing. Grant touched the crystal and felt a warm pulse flow through his fingers. A path lit up in his mind. Coordinates, directions, a feeling of pull. Sanctum was calling, and Luma had just unlocked the way. But Crosspoint was no longer safe. Varkan's forces had taken over most of the docks. They needed a ship, and they needed one now. Grant turned to Vera. Can you walk? She nodded weakly. For her, I will. He helped her stand, then looked at Luma. Stick close, stay quiet, and if things go bad, don't wait for me. Luma shook her head. If you fall, I fall too. Grant knelt down and pulled her into a hug. No, kid, he whispered. You're the reason I'll survive. Outside, the sounds of footsteps echoed again. Enemies were closing in, and their only escape was the dark launch decks of Crosspoint. Grant checked his weapon, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hunt was far from over, but now the hunted were ready to fight back. The launch deck was dark, echoing with distant alarms and hissing steam from damaged fuel lines. Grant moved like a shadow, Luma at his side, Vera leaning on his shoulder, her feet barely touching the ground. The docking bay was full of ships, big, small, armored, rusty, but none of them belonged to them. Their stolen access card would only open one. Bay 43, Grant whispered, eyes scanning. Luma pointed. There, the ship was small and ugly. An old model courier class with peeling paint and one engine humming louder than the other. But it was fast, and most importantly, it was theirs now. They reached the ramp just as red-armored bounty hunters entered the bay from behind. Go, Grant said firmly, helping Vera into the ship first. Luma followed, but her head turned as she felt it, that pressure in the air again. That strange hum in her blood. She looked up to see one of the hunters locking eyes with her. He didn't raise his weapon, not yet. He froze, like something in her gaze held him still. Grant fired a warning shot to break the stare, grabbed Luma's arm, and slammed the hatch shut behind them. Strap in, he growled, running to the cockpit. Inside, the ship's systems flickered, protesting his touch. He slapped the paddle hard. Come on, girl. Give me something. Luma sat next to her mother, clutching the glowing crystal tight. It pulsed with strange energy, brighter than ever. Vera placed a hand on her daughter's cheek, whispering words in her ancient tongue. Then, suddenly, the ship's systems lit up. Engines roared to full power, and the launch clamps hissed open. Grant blinked. Did you do that? Luma didn't answer. She was focused, her eyes glowing softly, the crystal now floating slightly above her palm. She's not just guiding us, Vera whispered. She's bonded to the ship. The courier ship lifted off the platform. Just as plasma fire rained down from above, Grant pulled hard on the controls, spinning out of range and blasting through the upper hangar shield. Alarms blared across Crosspoint Station, but it was too late. They were already gone. Behind them, 3 bounty ships took flight, chasing with deadly precision. Varkan, watching from a long-range cruiser, growled in frustration. She's escaping, he said, voice sharp. Intercept them at the moon gate. Grant pushed the ship to its limit, the controls vibrating under his hands. He flew low, weaving between cargo lanes and asteroid debris. But the bounty ships were faster, newer, equipped with guided missiles and stealth weapons. We're not going to make it, he muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Then Luma stood, unbuckled, and walked to the front of the ship. Her voice was calm. Let me try. Try what? Grant asked, not taking his eyes off the scanners. She can link to the ship's core, Vera said. The ancient kind, older than even human tech. She's not just royalty, she's a conduit. Luma closed her eyes, holding the crystal out in front of her. It floated higher, began spinning. and released a soft pulse of energy that moved through the ship like a wave. The engines hummed lower, but deeper, like something had awakened. On the dashboard, unknown coordinates flashed in blue. A symbol appeared, one Grant didn't recognize, but Luma touched the panel and said, "Sanctum." The ship jerked forward, faster than anything Grant had felt before. The stars outside stretched into streaks as the ship entered a worm line, a secret path no one could detect. Behind them, the bounty ships slammed into the invisible wall of the worm line. Unable to follow, one exploded on impact, another spun out into the dark. Inside, everything went still. They were flying through a silent tunnel of light and energy. Luma collapsed into Grant's arms, exhausted, her eyes dim. She used too much, Vera said softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. Grant held her carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "You saved us again." Luma smiled faintly. "You're my dad." The ship slowed as stars returned to normal outside. The windows ahead, surrounded by rings of shimmering mist and crystal moons, floated a green-blue planet. It pulsed with a strange warmth, a calm that wrapped around them like a blanket. "That," Vera said, sitting up slowly, "is Sanctum." Grant stared out the window, breathless. It didn't look like a stronghold or a fortress. It looked like a dream, a place untouched by war, a place where a girl could grow without chains. "Now what?" he asked quietly. "Now," Vera said, "we let them decide if we're worthy to enter." The ship began to slow on its own, gently gliding toward the planet like it was being welcomed home. Grant held Luma tightly as she drifted into sleep. He didn't know what trials waited below, but he knew one thing for sure: he would face them. Because this wasn't just a mission anymore, this was family. The ship touched down softly on the lush green plains of Sanctum. No guards came running, no weapons pointed at them. Instead, golden lights lit a narrow path before the landing bay, stretching into a forest filled with glowing trees and strange music on the wind. Grant stepped out first, scanning the area. But what he felt wasn't danger. It was peace, real peace. The kind he thought died years ago in fire and war. Vera walked slowly, her strength still low, her steps shaky but sure. Luma followed, holding the crystal tightly in both hands, her eyes wide, glowing brighter with each step. As they reached the edge of the path, figures appeared through the mist. Tall, graceful beings with robes made of starlight and skin that shimmered like moonstone. They were the keepers of Sanctum, the protectors of ancient bloodlines and forgotten truths. One of them, a woman with eyes like twin galaxies, stepped forward and knelt before Luma. "We have waited a long time," she said, her voice soft like wind through leaves. Luma looked at her, unsure. "You were waiting for me?" The keeper smiled gently. "You are the last of the Starburn, the bridge between worlds." The light in the dark, Vera bowed deeply, tears in her eyes. "I kept her hidden, but she always glowed too bright." "You saved her," the keeper said, turning to Grant. "And in doing so, you reminded us what it means to be human." Grant didn't speak. He was never good with words. But when Luma looked up at him and held his hand, everything made sense. "You brought her across the stars through fire and betrayal," the keeper continued. "Why?" Grant took a deep breath. "Because no one else would," he said. "Because she asked me to be her dad. And I said yes." The keepers looked at one another, silent, thoughtful. Then another stepped forward, an elder with a staff of crystal and bone. "You carry no royal blood, no ancient power, no starfire in your veins," he said to Grant. "But still, she chose you." He touched Grant's forehead gently, and for a moment, Grant saw a flash, stars being born, galaxies spinning, and Luma standing in the center of it all, her hands glowing like suns. Then the vision faded, and he was standing in the forest again, heart pounding. "What was that?" he asked quietly. "Her future," the elder replied, "and your place in it." They were taken to a silver sanctuary carved into the roots of a living mountain. There, Vera was treated by healers, her wounds slowly closing, her spirit recovering. Luma was taken to a sacred chamber, where ancient stones responded to her touch and light bloomed under her feet. She looked back at Grant before entering and whispered, "You'll wait for me, right?" "Always," he said. Time passed, days, maybe weeks, and Luma trained under starlit skies. She learned how to harness her inner light, to listen to the universe's whisper, but even with power in her hands, she always returned to one person when the sun set, the human who never let go. One evening, as the stars above aligned in a rare spiral, the keepers held a ceremony. Luma stood in the center, her body wrapped in a cloak of living silk, her eyes glowing like twin stars. Keeper raised his voice. "Before us stands the child of the stars, the last of the Lightburn, the first to bond with a human." Gasps echoed around the sanctuary, but Luma only smiled. She turned and walked to Grant, lifting his rough hand in her glowing ones. "This is my father," she said clearly, "chosen not by blood, but by love." Grant felt his throat tighten. He'd fought battles, watched cities fall, lost brothers, but this moment, this girl calling him father in front of galaxies, this was the victory he never expected. The keepers bowed. "You are one of us now," the elder said. "Not by blood, but by bond." Vera stood nearby, tears in her eyes. No longer broken, no longer hunted. Her child had become something more, not just a symbol, but a light the galaxy could follow. That night, as the stars danced and the forest sang, Luma sat beside Grant outside the sanctuary. "You don't have to protect me anymore," she whispered. Grant smiled and pulled her close. "I'll protect you anyway." She looked up, her voice soft. "Do you think others like us are out there? Others who were forgotten?" Grant nodded. "And now," he said, "they'll know they're not alone, because sometimes all it takes to change the galaxy is one small voice, a whisper through cold metal bars. Can I have a dad now, please?" And one man brave enough to say, "Yes."